So today is Poetry Day, and I love poetry. I grew up in a situation where my parents read poems to us. Actually, they read the poems again and again and again and again, and so I couldn't not memorize poems. So when I was about your age, of course I don't know how old you are because I don't know who you are, but I'm assuming that you're somewhere between the ages of, say, 6 or 7 and 99. So when I was about your age, I started memorizing poems. And it was a very handy skill to have because you can entertain people with poems. You can tell poems to grandparents who are charmed by poems. The thing that's different between poems and jokes is that jokes, if you tell it once, okay, you're kind of done. Then people know it. Or conveniently, some people forget your joke. But with poems, you can actually tell the same poem again and again, and people can experience and enjoy it again and again. And my favorite thing was to be able to tell poems and entertain people. In fact, I think I will end by telling a poem that I still remember using when I was a camp counselor at 15 years old, and created a little skit where I narrated the poem and then my little campers acted out the parts of it. And it was hilarious. One of my happiest childhood memories was being able to tell poems to campers, and then as a teacher I could tell poems. As a parent, I expanded and loved the poems, and I have not memorized all the poems I wish I would memorize, but I did create a program whereby you can memorize poems. It's called Linguistic Development Through Poetry Memorization. And if you were to embark on the journey of learning all the poems in this program and repeating them often enough so that you would never forget them, you would, and it would probably take many months, possibly a few years, but you would memorize 80 poems and 20 excerpts from famous speeches and be able to recite them on demand. And what a tremendous thing to take into adulthood. But let's start with the first 5 poems. I like to start with things that are very easy. My philosophy on pretty much everything is easy plus 1. So do something that's easy and then keep doing that while you add something to that. And then do both of those things until that's easy, and then add something to that, and then do all of those things until that's easy. And only when what you've done so far is easy do you add more to it. And this applies really to everything. It applies to sports, or music, or art, or certainly writing. Those of you who've used our structure and style for students, or really any of our writing program materials, you know that the dress-up checklist you start with, it's just 1 or 2 things, and when that's easy, you add a third, and when you do that and it becomes easy, you continue adding until pretty soon you can do a dozen things in every paragraph, and it should be easy. So the first poem I've chosen, the easiest one that I know, almost any child can learn this poem in a very short period of time. Ooey Gooey, author unknown. Means we don't know who originally thought of this poem or wrote it down or said it to anybody. But what we do know is that it is fun, it has a bit of humor, a little twist at the end. It even is a story in a way that goes through a situation of characters and problem and the unfortunate resolution. But that's a different lesson for a different day. So let's take a look at Ooey Gooey, and I want to show you a way to memorize this fairly quickly. Ooey Gooey was a worm. A mighty worm was he. He stepped upon the railroad tracks. The train he did not see. Ooey Gooey. Yes, again, it's a sad ending, but no real worms were hurt in the making of this poem. Okay, now the first technique I would share with you is the disappearing word technique. Now, to do this, you have to probably have a whiteboard. Hopefully, all of you who are learning at home have a whiteboard that you can use for the purpose of memorizing things. But the disappearing word technique is very helpful. What you do is you start erasing 1 or 2 words per line. So you probably get rid of those. And maybe that one, because you had worm, so you know it's worm. Maybe get rid of that one. And maybe that one. Okay, so now some of the words are missing, but your magnificent brain is going to be able to fill in, I believe, those missing words. So try it with me. Ooey Gooey, worm. Did you get it? Yeah, okay. So, a mighty was he. He stepped upon the railroad. Now, was it 1 track or 2 tracks? Do you remember? Yes, tracks. The train he did see. Ooey. You got it. Okay, so that's not so tough, right? Now, if you want to, you can try that a couple times. If you were a little fuzzy and you couldn't remember what word was there, okay, don't panic. Look at the text. We've sent you the text. And you can try it again until you can do that and you fill in all the words and it's easy. And it shouldn't take too many times. Once you've got that, what do you think we do? More words disappear. Maybe we get rid of that one, and that one, and that one, and that one. And let's try it now and see if your mind fills in and you can reproduce the poem. Gooey, worm, a mighty was he upon the railroad, he did see. Ooey Gooey. Perfect, good job. Now, you see how this is set. Your mind has the memory, and because the space is still there, it fills in the appropriate words. Now, if that wasn't easy, what do? Try it again, refer to the paper if you need to, and you do that until you can fill in all the words and say the poem. And then what happens? More words go away. This is the disappearing word technique of teaching something. So maybe we get rid of that one, and those 2, and that one, and that one. Not a lot of words left. Do you think we can do it? All right, let's try. Gooey, mighty was he upon he did ooey gooey. All right, good. So if that was easy, you can get rid of a few more words. In fact, we're going to assume you've got this now and eliminate all but 1 word per line. So we get rid of that one, we get rid of that one, we get rid of that one, and we have only 5 lines. And so let's see if it works. Okay, you with me? Gooey, mighty, upon he ooey. All right, very nice. Then the final step, what do? They're all gone. No more words remain. And we don't need them to remain here because they have been moved into your mind. Maybe you see it, maybe you hear it, maybe you see and hear it. Let's try it. Good job. Excellent. Very nice. So I would guess that if you practice this as much as needed so that it was easy with each step of the way, you could now go and recite this poem and tell it to someone, probably a younger child. I've actually known children as young as 3 years old to memorize this poem. And of course, you stretch out in the end. Ooey gooey. And, just think of your reaction to a smushed worm. Yuck. That's the kind of, expression in your voice you might like to have. Okay, so that is the first technique, is the disappearing word technique. The next technique is to retain the rhyming word technique. Okay, our second poem is Celery by the author Ogden Nash. We do know who wrote this poem, and if you like this poem, you might like to look up Ogden Nash and some of the other poems he has written, because they're usually very pithy, often short, humorous. And so this particular poem, only 4 lines. And so with this one, we want to use the repetition plus the rhyming word method. So first we say it together. Oops. Need that. Celery raw develops the jaw, but celery stewed is more quietly chewed. Okay, very nice. Let's say it together again. Celery raw develops the jaw, but celery stewed is more quietly chewed. Now, which words rhyme? They have the same ending sound. And in this poem, it's very convenient because it's the first 2, raw and jaw, and then the last 2, stewed and chewed. So if you were to analyze this poem, it would be AABB rhyme scheme. So these go together and these go together. Let's say it again. Celery raw develops the jaw, but celery stewed is more quietly chewed. So now in this case, rather than randomly erasing words, we're going to erase everything except the first word and the rhyming words. And so you should be able to fill this in. Celery raw develops jaw, but stewed is chewed. Okay. Now we're going to eliminate all but the rhyming words. And I'm actually going to replace them so that they are in an order. In just a line like that. This should help you remember then the whole thing. So, what comes first? You remember? That's kind of easy because the title was celery. So, celery raw. Now, what does celery raw do? Develops the jaw, but celery stewed is more quietly chewed. And so now you should be able to kind of remember the whole poem with just those 4 words: raw, jaw, stewed, chewed. So that's the second technique, is to try and memorize the rhyming words at the end, and then your brain will anticipate what goes with those. And there's usually a logical flow to it. Now, if you'd like to tell this poem, you might add in a tad of dramatic effect, right? So, celery raw develops the jaw, but celery stewed is more quietly chewed. And so you can have a couple gestures there and practice that up. All right, the third poem of our program is called The Little Man Who Wasn't There. I like this because it uses a who clause. And if you know our writing program at all, you know that that is one of our stylistic techniques, the who-which clause. It's an adjective clause, but the nice thing about poems is sometimes they use techniques that you're trying to also learn how to do in your writing. And by memorizing a poem that uses one of those techniques, then that helps you use that technique more smoothly and naturally in your own composition. So, The Little Man Who Wasn't There by Hughes Mearns. Now this is actually just one stanza out of a longer poem, but we're trying to keep things very simple here for you in the beginning. And so once you can say ooey gooey and celery without hesitation, and you remember it and it's fun, then you can go up with this one. As I was going up the stair, I met a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. I wish he'd stay away. Okay, so that's kind of funny. How do you meet someone who isn't there? And if he isn't there, then why do you wish he'd stay away? It's goofy, right? It's kind of goofy. And you can apply either the disappearing word technique or the rhyming word keyword outline idea, and you should be able to memorize this pretty easily. Now, once you've got the third one here memorized, you move to the fourth. Now, I will tell you the fourth one is 2 stanzas. It's 2 sets of 4 lines, and it has a slightly different rhyme scheme. The poem 2 and 3 had that AABB, where the first 2 lines rhymed and the second 2 lines rhymed. This next one, see if you can identify the rhyme scheme. Hopefully you have the paper, but I'll say it and you can watch it, you can listen to it and read it at the same time. This is part of a large collection of animal poems by Hilaire Belloc. Belloc wrote a poem for every letter of the alphabet using animals. So this is V for vulture, obviously, the vulture. The vulture eats between his meals, and that's the reason why he very, very rarely feels as well as you or I. His eye is dull, his head is bald, his neck is growing thinner. Oh, what a lesson for us all to only eat at dinner. Of course, the first time my son learned this poem, he pointed out to me that it's not very logical. Because if your neck is growing thinner, that means you're not eating enough. So you should be eating more than just what you get at dinner. I had no response to that. It's Belloc's poem. He wrote it, but you can decide what you think about snacking too much or not, what do they say, spoil your appetite? Okay. All right, so this is 2 stanzas. Now, when you have a 2 stanza or more stanza poem, you have to treat it as it were 2 different poems in terms of memorizing. Don't try to say all 8 lines again and again and again and again until you can do that. Instead, make your goal the first stanza. That's it. Okay, so your first goal is to memorize the first stanza. Now, what is the rhyme scheme? Did you figure it out? Let's look at the words at the end of the line that rhyme. Meals, why, feels, I. Okay, so that would be an A, B, A, B, meaning the first line, meals, rhymes with the third line, feels, and the second line, why, rhymes with the fourth line, I. Then the next stanza has the same rhyme scheme. His eye is dull, his head is bald, his neck is growing thinner. Oh, what a lesson for us all to only eat at dinner. Bald, all, and then thinner, dinner. So again, each stanza uses the same rhyme scheme. And noting the rhyme scheme can help you memorize more quickly because you've got it in your brain. That's where that idea has to go, not just logically, but also to meet the sound, to meet the rhyme of it. Okay, so you would say, okay, the vulture eats between his meals, and that's the reason why. Just stop right there. The vulture eats between his meals, and that's the reason why. Try it. you get it? If not, it's okay. Look at it again and keep doing. And once you've got it, okay, then you can add in the next one. He very, very rarely feels as well as you or I. Try that. Okay, peek if you need to. He very, very rarely feels as well as you or I. Okay, now you got both those pieces, A, B, A, B. Let's put it together. The vulture eats between his meals, and that's the reason why he very, very rarely feels as well as you or I. Okay, now you do that until it is easy. Then you go to the next stanza and you memorize the next stanza, and then you have got both stanzas, and then you repeat it. Now, one of the tricks to not forgetting something is to repeat it often enough that you don't forget it. And so what our recommendation is that you say every poem that you have learned every day up until you've learned, say, 20 poems, and it's taking you a bit of time to recite all these 20 poems, at which point you've probably done it enough that you can go to an every other poem every other day. And so you would say half the poems you know one day and the other half the next day, and then keep learning more poems, and then once you don't have time, maybe by the time you've learned 40 poems, you might go to every third poem you've learned every third day, and you keep saying every poem you've ever learned often enough so that you never forget it. Okay, now the fifth and last poem that we have here is After the Party by William Wise. Now this one is much longer than any of the previous ones. So it was kind of easy, a little bit harder, and now we're a little bit harder because there's 4 stanzas of 6 lines each. 4 stanzas of 6 lines each. And so that's a lot. That's 24 lines to have to memorize. But you know the trick. When you have multi-stanzas, what do? Try to memorize all 24 lines at once? No. Treat each stanza as a project, as a poem. Don't worry about the rest of the poem. Just start with the first one, right? And get that down. Then do the next one and say both of them together until you've got that down, half the poem. Then add the third one and say that together until you've got that down. And then finally, you can get all 4 of the 6-line stanzas. It will take longer. You will not memorize this in one day the way you did Ooey Gooey, but that's okay. Anything worth doing is worth taking time. So let's look at the poem. Jonathan Blake ate too much cake. He isn't himself today. He's tucked up in bed with a feverish head, and he doesn't much care to play. All right, what's the rhyme scheme? Blake cake, today bed head play. Now this is different, isn't it? The first 2 lines rhyme. So A, then we have today, which doesn't quite rhyme with cake, so we're going to call that a B. Then we have bed and head, so that's going to be CC, and then play rhymes perfectly with today, so that's a B. So your rhyme scheme here would be AAB, CCB. Okay, so that's your rhyme scheme. Do you get it? AAB, CCB. If you remember the rhyme scheme, when you get to that last line, you'll remember, oh, that last line has to rhyme with the third line. And you get kind of a mental map of the thing. Now, the first line, very easy. Jonathan Blake. What did Jonathan Blake do? Ate too much cake. What are the consequences of that? He isn't himself today, which means he's not feeling normal, right? He's tucked up in bed with a feverish head, and he doesn't much care to play. Now, you can use either the disappearing word practice method, or you can use the put the rhyming words, so the first word and the last rhyming word, into kind of an outline, and practice until you've got that. Now, there's a little bit of a trick to this poem in that the first 2 stanzas use the exact same first 2 lines. That makes it easier in one way, but a little bit of a challenge in another way, because you might get them confused. So you want to be sure that you sort it out, be sure the first stanza is super clear in your mind, then you go for the next one. Okay, the first 2 lines are the same, that's effortless. Jonathan Blake ate too much cake. But now you might want to say he isn't himself today, because that's what you have been saying. So you have to reprogram yourself. You have to think, no, this isn't the first stanza, it's different. What's different? Well, not only did he eat too much cake, he ate 3 kinds of ice cream too. From his latest reports, he's quite out of sorts, and I'm sure the reports are true. You see the same rhyme scheme. Blake cake, 2, report sorts, and true. So same rhyme scheme, so that's convenient. First 2 lines the same, but then it changes. So you have to keep that clear in your mind so you don't get the first stanza and the second stanza mixed up, because you already have the habit of saying the 3rd line after the first 2. Does that make sense? Okay, now the 3rd stanza does not use any repeated lines, and so that's going to be a little bit easy. It's also a litany, a nice little list of all the things he ate, so that's kind of cute. I'm sorry to state that he also ate 6 pickles, a pie, and a pear. In fact, I confess it's a reasonable guess. He ate practically everything there. All right, state, ate, pear, confess, guess, there. Same rhyme scheme, right? A, B, C, C, B. So you should practice that until it's easy. Once you can say all 3 of those stanzas, then you finish it up with the 4th stanza. And this is a little tricky because the first 2 lines are almost the same as the first 2 stanzas' first 2 lines, except for the first word. So you remember, okay, 4th stanza has this extra word, yes. And sometimes we do that when we're summing up, when we're making a conclusion to whatever we're talking. We might say yes and blah, blah, blah. So this is letting you know this poem is coming to an end. Yes. Now, first 2 lines of the first 2 stanzas, exactly the same. Jonathan Blake ate too much cake. But don't make the mistake of defaulting to he isn't himself today, because that might be your habit. Instead, you got to say, nope, this is the last stanza, it's different. Yes, Jonathan Blake ate too much cake, so he's not at his best today. But there's no need for sorrow. If you come back tomorrow, I'm sure he'll be out to play. So, who would be saying this, right? Who might be saying this to someone? It's not Jonathan Blake talking, because he's, of course, sick in bed. Probably his mother, or maybe his father, or maybe a kind older sibling. A not-so-kind older sibling might not say it quite so politely. And it's interesting because it never says, Jonathan Blake went to a party. But the title is After the Party. And so now you can imagine himself, let's see, what did he eat? Too much cake, 3 kinds of ice cream, 6 pickles, a pie, and a pear, and possibly everything else there. Well, if you would like to get sick for some reason, you could try Jonathan Blake's method, although I don't think it felt very good. So anyway, kind of a classic little poem. It's been around longer than I've been alive, and I enjoyed learning it as a child, so hopefully you will too. All right, so there you have the first 5 poems of our Linguistic Development Through Poetry Memorization program. And if you would like to learn more poems, we can let you buy the program and do that as well. So thanks for joining me on the 5th day of Christmas. Can you believe it? I forgot something. My director just reminded me that I promised you I would tell you my poem that I learned as a child and used as a camp counselor. Now, this is a pretty long poem, and it's got some vocabulary that you may not recognize. So this poem, The Embarrassing Episode of Little Miss Muffet, was written by GuyWhitmore Carroll, who also wrote several other poems using very sophisticated language to retell simple little things like Aesop fables or nursery rhymes. This is the Little Miss Muffet on steroids. Little Miss Muffet discovered a tuffet, which never occurred to the rest of us, and as 'twas a June day, and just about noonday, she wanted to eat like the best of us. Her diet was whey, and I hasten to say it is wholesome, and people grow fat on it. The spot being lonely, the lady not only discovered the tuffet, she sat on it. A rivulet gabbled and babbled beside her as rivulets are commonly thought to do, and dragonflies sported around and cavorted, as poets say dragonflies ought to do. When, glancing aside, for a moment she spied a horrible sight that brought fear to her. A hideous spider was sitting beside her and most unavoidably near to her. Albeit unsightly, this creature politely said, "Madam, I earnestly vow to you, I am penitent that I did not bring my hat. I should certainly otherwise bow to you." Though anxious to please, he was so ill at ease that he lost all his sense of propriety, and he grew so inept that he clumsily stepped in her plate, which is barred in society. This curious error completed her terror. She shuddered, and growing much paler, not only left the tuffet, but dealt him a buffet, which doubled him up in a sailor knot. Now it must be explained that at this he was pained. He said, "Madam, I have vexed you, no doubt of it. Your fist's like a truncheon." "You're still in my luncheon," was all that she answered. "Get out of it!" Now the moral is this, be it madam or miss, to whom you have something to say, you're only absurd when you get in the curd, but you're rude when you get in the way. That was my favorite.